Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Phoebe and in this video I'll be showing you how to make a shirt with a two-piece collar. So before we get into the video, please make sure you like, share and most importantly subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. I used 1.5 yards of this teal colored satin fabric and I'm going to be making my markings directly on my fabric. So the first thing I did was to open up my fabric like this, and I placed the two edges of my fabric together like so. Then I made sure to align my fabric properly. Now from the edge of my fabric, I just went ahead to create a straight line at that point because the edges were not even and I needed an even edge. So after doing that, from that line, I went inwards by 2.5 inches. Now the reason for marking this is for the button extension and also the buttonhole extension. So I marked 2.5 inches and then brought the folded part of my fabric this way and placed it on that 2.5 inches line like so. So I'm just making sure that my fabric is well straightened out. Then I went back in with my chalk to just mark out that 2.5 inches line. Now this will be the center front, while here will be the center back. The next thing I did was to take the full length of my shirt. So I used a length of 29 inches. So I just marked the length right here and I went ahead to connect this line like this. From this point, I went ahead to mark half of my shoulder measurement, which is 8 inches. Then I came downwards by 1 inch for my shoulder slope. Then I went ahead to mark my shoulder to my bust line, which is 9.5 inches. So I also marked that right here at this point. Then my shoulder to my waistline is 17 inches. I also marked that at this point. After marking that, I went ahead to mark my shoulder to my hip line, which is 27 inches. So I marked that at this point too. Then I just went ahead to connect all those points into a straight line like this. So over here is my bust line, while here is my waistline, and this is my hip line. So once I was done with that, I went ahead to take my neck width from this point of 3 inches, and the neck depth for the back was 1 inch, while the neck depth for the front was 3 inches. So I marked it at this point here and also at this button extension. Then I went ahead to first of all create the neckline curve for the back and placed my ruler this way and created the neckline curve for the front. I also went ahead to create my shoulder slant line. Then I also marked half of my shoulder measurement at my bust line, and I went ahead to extend these points into a straight line like so. From this point here, which is the center back, I marked 1/4 of my bust circumference. Then I added 1 inch, which would be for the ease allowance because this is a shirt, so it's not going to be fitted. Then an extra 1 inch for the side seam allowance, making it a total of 2 inches extra to my bust circumference measurement. Then at this point on my waistline, I marked 1/4 of my waist circumference. Then because this is the waistline, I added an extra 3 inches to that measurement because the waist is not supposed to be fitted. Then on this point on my hip line, I marked 1/4 of my hip circumference measurement plus an extra 2 inches allowance, which I have explained why before. Then I just went ahead to connect these 3 points into a straight line like this. Then I decided to create a curved hem for the shirt because I don't want it to be straight. At this point here, I went ahead to find the midpoint of my armhole line. Then I marked 1/2 inch inwards like so, and I went ahead to just create my armhole curve. Then I added 1/2 inch seam allowance to my shoulder slant line. Then I went ahead to cut out everything by starting from the hemline. Then I cut through the side seam like this and through the armhole curve. So I first of all cut out the back neckline and the shoulder area. Then to cut out the front neckline, I first of all cut to this part right here. I then marked the neck width point. Then I raise the back up like this and I continue to cut out the front neckline to this point here. Then I place the back down, made sure everything was aligned, and I cut out the shoulder line or the shoulder slope. We have the back ready here, and this is the front. Then I went ahead to cut out the starting point that I placed there right at the edge of the fabric. I then placed a notch at this point here and also at this point here at the hem. I flipped the front over to the other side and I also went ahead to mark out that 2.5 inches extension on this other side. Then I made the points into a straight line like this. After I did that, I just opened up the front like so. And the next thing I'll be doing is to iron this interfacing on the 2.5 inches extension. So the interfacing is about 2 inches wide and this is ST. I'll take this to my pressing iron and give it a good press. So I've fused the interfacing to my fabric. The next thing I did was to just mark out that 2.5 inches extension line again. What I'll be doing now is to fold 1/2 inch like this. Then place it on that 2.5 inches line and I will make a top stitch at this point all the way to the hem. I'll repeat the same thing here. I would fold 1/2 inch inwards like this. Then I placed it on this line here and made a straight stitch down to the hem. I'm done stitching the two parts of the front for the button and buttonhole extension. Over here is the back part of my fabric. So I place the good side of the shoulder of the back to the good side of the front and I will stitch by 1/2 inch and I'll repeat the same thing on the other side. Place the shoulders together and sew by 1/2 inch. I have sewn the shoulders of the front and back together. I also went ahead to cut out my short sleeve and the sleeve length is 12 inches. It has a hem allowance of 1 inch and it is not a fitted sleeve. So I cut out 2 of my sleeve and the next thing I'll be doing is to sew the sleeve to the armhole of the shirt. So I'll go ahead and do this. I have sewn the 2 sleeves to the armhole of the shirt. What I'll be doing next is to place the good side of the front and back together like so. Then from the side seam allowance of the sleeve, I would sew by 1 inch till I get to the hem of the shirt. And I'm basically going to repeat the same thing on the other side. I'll place them good side to good side. Then from the sleeve area, I would sew by 1 inch down to the hem. After closing up the side seam, I just went ahead to give the shirt a good press at this point. The next thing I will be doing here is to sew up the hem of the shirt. To hem the shirt, I would fold the hem twice like this and make a straight stitch over the hem down to this point. And I'm done sewing up the hem and I made sure to give it a good press. So to create the collar, I just folded the neckline of the shirt into 2 like this. So I pinned up the button extension and I also pinned up the shoulder point. Then I would go ahead and place a notch at the center back like so. I would be taking the neckline measurement of the front first, starting from that button extension down to the shoulder point. So what I have for the front is 6.5 inches. Now for the back, starting from that shoulder point, I measured down to the center back where I notched and I have 3.5 inches. So in total, I have 10 inches on fold for the neckline. To draft out the collar, I have my pattern paper here. Please ignore my wrinkled pattern paper. So from this edge here, I went ahead to mark out the 10 inches, which was the total neckline on a fold. Then from here, I went upwards by 1.5 inches. I then came to this point here and marked the 1.5 inches. Then I connected these 2 points into a straight line like this. Then from this point, I marked the 3.5 inches for the back neckline. Then from that point, I marked the 6.5 inches for the front neckline. Then from here, I went upwards by 1/2 inch. I then connected that point to meet up with the back neckline like this. Because I came upwards here by 1/2 inch, From that point, I went ahead to just retake that 1.5 inches width that I took initially for the collar width, and I went back in to connect the points together like this. Then I just connected these points downwards like so. Then from this point, I went inwards by 1 inch. Remember, the button extension is 1 inch. After doing that, I went ahead to just create a little curve that you would normally see on collars. Here we have the collar stand, and the next thing is to create the collar fall. So to do that, from this point here, the collar fall measures up to 2.5 inches. So I just followed the initial line for the collar stand and marked the 2.5 inches up to this point, and I connected these points together like so. After doing that, I just made a straight connection between the collar stand and fall like this. Now from this point, I made an extension of 1 inch to create that sharp point you normally find on collars. I placed my ruler this way and connected to this point, which was a mistake. So I was supposed to connect it to this point. So I corrected that error. Make sure you connect to this point instead of this point. So here is the collar fall. So this part of the collar will be placed at the center back, and it needs to be cut on a fold. Here too will be cut on a fold, and I'll just go ahead to use my scissors to first of all cut out the collar stand. Then I just went ahead to cut out the collar fall, and I'll be cutting out 2 pieces of the collar fall and 2 pieces of the collar stand. I realized I did not cut out this part of the collar stand. Remember, the point where I came up was by 1/2 inch. So I went back in to cut that out, and the collar is ready to be transferred to fabric. I added 1/2 inch seam allowance around the collar except the part that will be cut on a fold. So starting with the collar fall, you can see that I cut out 2 pieces just like I said I would. I just placed them together on the good side, and from here I will start sewing by 1/2 inch all over this place to this point and down here. And when I'm done sewing, I'm going to turn the collar right side out from the opening here. Here is what the collar fall looks like after sewing. So I flipped it inside out from that opening there. Now I'll be moving to the collar stand. The first thing I did was to place the notch at this button extension. Then I placed the notch at the 2 center points of the collar stand. Then I also went ahead to find the midpoint of the collar fall. Now I'm going to be working on the collar stand. So I have 2 pieces of the collar stand. So I placed the collar fall at the center point of the collar stand, and I'm just going ahead to make sure that the edge of the collar fall also matches up with the point where I placed the notch on the collar stand. Then I place the second part of the collar stand together like this, and then from the edge here I will sew by 1/2 inch till I get to this other side. I have made a stitch from this point here all the way down to this point here. The next thing I'll be doing is to fold this part of the collar stand inwards like this, and I'll go ahead and give it a good press. So I'm done pressing 1/2 inch inwards on the collar stand. The next thing I did here was to sew from this point here and blend it into this stitch I made before. And on the other side, I also did the same thing. I would go ahead and make the stitch on the 2 points. So I'm done stitching the 2 points, and you can see that it is now secured. I've gone ahead to trim off the excess allowance around the collar. Now I just turned it inside out like so, and the next thing I'll be doing is to go ahead and give it a good press so that it lays nice and flat. After pressing, the collar is now laying flat. Now remember the notch that I placed at the center of the collar stand. I would bring my shirt like this, and remember the notch I placed at the center back of my neckline. So I will match up these notches together like this, and from here I would sew by 1/2 inch till I get to this button extension part, and I would also repeat the same thing on the other side. I would sew down to this point of the button extension by 1/2 inch. I'm done sewing that part of the collar into the neckline, and I did the stitching from the inside of my shirt. Now the next thing I'll be doing is to trim off the excess around the neckline. So I'm done trimming off the excess. The next stage now is to finish up the collar. Remember the 1/2 inch that I ironed inwards on the collar stand? I would use it to overlap the stitch line on my neckline like this and make a top stitch from this point all the way to this point. And when I get here, I would also repeat the same process and stitch. I'm done making the top stitch on the collar, and I did this on the outer part of my shirt. Then I went ahead to make the buttonholes on my shirt. I have a video tutorial where I showed how to make buttonholes using your domestic machine, so you might want to check that video out. So the next thing I'm doing here is to mark out the spot where I would be placing my buttons. And as for the buttons, I was fortunate enough to get a matching color of buttons for my shirt. I'm just going ahead to place the buttons right on the spots where I marked for each of them, and I have 8 of them there. And with this matching color of thread and my hand needle, I would go ahead and hand sew the buttons to the shirt. After everything, I went ahead to make a matching short for my shirt. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all in my next video.